I believe everyone's in place. I want to welcome you to the Jim Wood Speaker Series sponsored by the School of Business at Clayton State University. Thank you all for being here. This is a very special day today. We have a speaker that I think you'll remember for quite some time today, Ambassador Adalnio Senna Ganem. Ambassador Ganem is the Consul General of Brazil. And let me tell you just a little bit about our distinguished speaker today. Ambassador Ganem is a career diplomat. He's not an honorary consul or any of those things. He's a career diplomat with ambassador rank. That's important in itself if you don't know that fact. He became the Consul General of Brazil in Atlanta on May 8th, 2008, and the Brazil Consulate General in Atlanta is one of Georgia's largest consulates. Ambassador Ganem serves quite a few states: Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. So it's quite a vast territory. Ambassador Ganem was born in the state of Bahia. If you've ever been to Brazil or looked at a map of Brazil, you know Bahia as a paradise in the northeastern part of Brazil on the Atlantic Ocean. He received his first degree in law in Rio de Janeiro and completed the Diplomatic Academy at the Instituto Rio Branco, followed by postgraduate degrees in economics and trade at New York University and Instituto Rio Branco. Ambassador Ganem knows the United States very well. As his first assignments, he served at the Brazilian mission to the European communities and at the Brazilian embassy in Lima, Peru. In 1992, he was appointed director of the Brazilian Trade Bureau in New York. And from 1994 to 98, Ambassador Ganem served as head of the international and economic staff of the Vice President of Brazil. Later, he was appointed Minister Counselor and Chargé d'Affaires at the Brazilian Embassy in Paris. Not bad assignments that Ambassador Ganem has experienced. From 2003 to 2006, he was head of the International Relations Department of the state of Sao Paulo. And in 2006, he was appointed to ambassador, and in the following year, then assigned as Consul General in Atlanta. Before I turn our program over to Ambassador Ganem, I wanted to mention, I should have mentioned already, my name is John Parkerson. I'm the Director of International Programs, but I also serve the School of Business. And I noticed that the Dean of the School of Business is here, Dean Alfonso Ogbui. But I also recognize the Provost of Clayton State University, Michael Crafton. I don't see other deans presently. I think you may be in the room, not sure. But we do have some distinguished guests who've joined us today, and I wanted to recognize them because they're special, and we're so happy that they traveled to Clayton State University today to listen to Ambassador Ganem. Cheryl Stewart, who's the Executive Director of the Georgia Council for International Visitors. Hello, Cheryl. Lucia Jennings. Lucia Jennings is the president of the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce, and she's also an executive at the Coca-Cola Refreshments. Kathy Falls also is with us. Kathy's the Director of International Trade at the Georgia Department of Economic Development. So we have a very distinguished group of visitors, plus, of course, Clayton State University students, faculty, staff, and members of the local community. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Ambassador Ganem.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Oh, there is no, just a second. Good morning. It's a great pleasure being here with you. Thank you, John, for introducing me. And I would like to thank Mr. Alfonso Ogbui for hosting this event. Thank you all for being here today. It's a great pleasure. It's my second time here at the university, and I hope that I will continue to be present here. And we are trying to develop a program of cooperation between Clayton University and some universities in Brazil. I think that we are living a very interesting times, and you students who are young will see a very different world in some decades. And it's a fascinating world, I would say. And in fact, we had until last century a European-centered world. After that, a European-centered world with United States support. And this century, we will see a totally different world, a world centered in the Americas and Asia. That will be the new player. And also an interaction between North and South much deeper than it was, at least different than it was in the past. And only to illustrate those comments, I would say that the G7 of developed countries was replaced in terms of economic decisions by the G20, which is the institution that is taking the measures in terms of economic decisions in the world. And besides that, I will show you, 10 years ago, we had British and American banks as the 10 largest in the world in terms of bank share price to book values. And today, this is a Financial Times report, we have a Chinese and Brazilian bank as the highest bank share price to book values. But in fact, I will, of course, try to situate Brazil in this different scenario and different world. And I would like to start saying that Brazil is very peaceful, multiracial country. And this is quite a different model of what we have all over the world, although it's close to the United States. And I'll try to make some brief comparison. In Brazil, the integration process of all ethnicities was a natural process. In fact, you can't tell who is Brazilian because we are a mix of many different races and ethnicities. Every Brazilian is a mix of 5, 6, 7 ethnicities, 8 until 10 ethnicities. And this made us, I would say, a very integrated country that could be a model for the next generation, but I mean really in the future, from centuries from now. We had a process in the United States, and I read in the New York Times many articles in the last weeks about the same processes occurring here in the United States. So we are close in many ways, including as countries of multiracial people. And besides that, of course, that you had in the United States this wonderful experience that was the civil rights movement. So we had so many things in common that Brazil and the United States decided, and this is very important in terms of the future of humanity, of the models of the countries in the future. You are seeing the events in Egypt and other countries. All those are movements in terms of opening the countries, opening the society, in terms of democracy, of living together. In Brazil, you can see Jews and Arabs marching together for peaceful purpose. And the United States and Brazil are very similar societies. You have the experience of civil rights movement. You have now this trend of mixing ethnicities, and this was a natural process in Brazil. So we decide, both countries, to create a program that is the plan of action for promoting racial and gender equality. It's a unique, innovative program in the world. And although I will speak to you about economy and economic evolution in Brazil, I decided to make those remarks because I think that this will be very, very important in the future. Not for now, because it's too early. You are seeing some radicalisms, radical movements in terms of religion, but it will be different, I hope so, in the future. I will make, as I told you, some remarks on Brazilian economy, and I will try to finish my speech in about 15 minutes, then we can talk and make comments, have questions, and I can, of course, answer any kind of questions in any segment. Brazilian population is about 200 million inhabitants, and Brazil is one of the major countries in the world by every standard. In terms of area, in fact, we are the 5th in terms of population and in terms of GDP. And this is a very, it's a very fast movement because, as I told you, the world is getting different and moving from Europe to Americas and Asia as the centers of the world. Brazil last year was the 8th economy in the world. In the end of 2010, it was already 7. 5 years, about 5 years from now, it will be the 5th. And much more important than that. 5 years from now, about 5 years from now, only Germany and Europe will be among the 5 largest economy. And 10 or 15 years now, there will be no European country among the 5 main economies. You can see already by purchasing power that there is only Germany among the main economies in the world. And 10 or 15 years from now, I think you understand the concept of nominal. Nominal is the real dollars, and purchasing power, the capacity of power of the money, buying things, the equivalent of concrete production in the country. So in 10 or 15 years from now, only Asian and Brazil and the United States will be among the 5 main economies. And this will be the center of decision. Besides that, the southern countries, the emerging countries will be also a very important player in terms of the economic decisions, in terms of marketing in the world. This dynamism of Brazil was due to more than 15 since 94 stable growth. The average growth in Brazil since 94 was 5%. We cannot grow in the same rate as India and China because we are relatively mature market economy. And if we grow at 7.5, 9%, 8%, the economy will overheat. We had already an impact in inflation last year. The inflation was 5.9%, as you see. Then we had to limit our growth about 5%. One of the factors of the growth of Brazil, besides the stability of the economy, of the process, we took some very conservative monetary policy, but at the same time adopted social programs. The result, you have heard about Brazil, an unequal country. It continues to be an unequal country, but 15 years ago, 40% of the population were very poor or poor. Today, although it's a high number, but it's 20%. It reduced from 40 to 20% of the population. This is still very high, but anyway, it's already close to the percentage of poor in the United States, which is 14, increased with the crisis. I would like to say that in fact, the crisis we had last year in 2009 accentuated the movement, the trends in the world. The other factor for Brazilian growth, besides the absorption of poor classes in the medium class and the middle class, was a high percent or a high number for foreign direct investments. The inflows last year was 30 billion because of the crisis, but this year it will be over 40 billion dollars, and it will increase because of the program of the infrastructure in Brazil and because of the events, that international events that we have in the near future. I mentioned you the rate of inflation, which is high, and we have already adopted some fiscal policies to reduce the rate to the target. The target is between 4 and 5%, which is a good target, a moderate target for a developing country. This is really impressive because Brazilian public debt is one of the lowest in the world, most impressive in terms of lowest. You have all this discussion about the fiscal deficit in the United States that is approaching 100% of GDP. The European countries have already adapted public debt that is an average 100%. Some countries are less, some are higher. In Japan, if I'm not wrong, is 200%. Then, as I mentioned you, one of the factors that contributed to this Brazil dynamism is a very conservative monetary policy. And today we have one of the lowest, really the lowest, especially for a large country as Brazil, rate of public debt in the world, only 40% of GDP. We are not very exposed countries. We are beginning to be, in the last 10 years, a very exposed country. So, to every dollar United States has invested in Brazil, in the last year, Brazil has invested, Brazilian companies have invested the same dollar in the United States market. But considering the size of Brazilian economy, the trade should be larger than international trade than that. It's because Brazil and the United States are continental countries. They are not so exposed internationally, except in terms of investment, but in terms of trade, they are not so exposed as European or some Asian countries, for example. Brazilian West trade flow is about $50 billion, but the importance of the Brazil-United States trade has reduced dramatically in the last 10, 15 years, not only because Brazil enlarged the markets, but also because I think that we didn't explore the potential of our economies. And I would like to make a few remarks at this point, and it's that as we are so close countries in terms of value, and considering the challenges of the world for the next decades, surely we couldn't have not a better partnership than Brazil and the United States, and you should work for it. Those are some of Brazilian companies in the south of the United States. As I mentioned we have invested in the last years $1 for every dollar the United States has invested in Brazil. I would divide the Brazilian opportunities for investments in Brazil in two large segments. The traditional ones, which are the traditional industries, not traditional in terms of some are very innovative industries, but those are opportunities that are there from many, many years. And they are in every economic sector. Those would be that I would call the traditional market opportunities. And Brazil is one of the largest producers or the largest market in any of those sectors, which in fact comprise the whole segments of economy. For example, in terms of regional air jets, we are the fourth producer in the world, or the fourth largest world manufacturer in the world. In terms of vehicle industry, we are the sixth. Petroleum, we just discovered huge reserves, will be in the near future the third largest producer, probably the third largest producer in the world. Biofuels, we have the most innovative technology in the world, and we are the largest producer of biofuels in the world. This is why the mix of energy is totally different in Brazil and the other countries. In Brazil, 47% of the matrix is in terms of renewable energy. In the other countries of the world, the renewable energy is much less than that, around, I would say, 20% only of the matrix. I am running with the presentation to give you the opportunity for some comment. Biotechnology, we are quite new, but we are developing, especially in agriculture and animal production. We have a very innovative segment. Minerals and metallurgy, the largest exporter, produce and export iron ore, and one of the largest producers in raw and processed minerals, and one of the largest in steel. Chemical industry, the ninth industry, we have a very good cooperation with the United States and very balanced in terms of profile trade in every sector. In fact, the United States has a surplus of $10 billion with Brazil, the largest, if I'm not wrong, surplus that the United States has with any country. Cosmetic industry, we are the third, fourth in cell phones. In fact, this is an outdated number. It's almost 200 million cell phones already. Agribusiness with the United States, we are the largest producers of agricultural products and food, processed foods in the world. And Brazil will be the first very soon because we use only 20% of our arable land. Sugar cane, for example, uses only 2% of the arable land in Brazil. There is a huge space for productions of every kind of product. And here in agribusiness, you have a chart that you are the first in sugar, first in coffee, first in orange juice, second soybean, second in beef, second in tobacco, second in ethanol in terms of production. I think it's what we were. Now this year we are the first in exporter also, second in poultry, and fourth in exporter, fourth in corn, and fourth in pork. Food and beverage industry also is very important. Third largest producer pasta and so on, poultry. Organic products, the sixth. Pulp and paper industry, we are the fourth. Leather industry, the second and third in shoes. Textile, the fifth producer. In terms of design, probably we are the third after Italy and France. With the United States, we compete for the third position. Tourism is still a not very well developed industry in terms of international tourism. The domestic tourism is large, about 50 million people per year, but international we are trying to double it from now until the new events, World Soccer and Olympic Games. And the second part of the opportunities, I would say that we are calling the new markets. First of all, is the huge growth acceleration program in infrastructure. And this will be from 2007 to 2016, the second largest infrastructure program in the world after China and before the United States. We will spend $1,274 billion from 2007 and 2016. And this is a huge opportunity for all international companies, besides all those segments, industrial segments, services segments. It will be a huge opportunity. Those are some of the projects, just as an illustration. Of course that we have many challenges, but before that I would say that besides the infrastructure program, we have the biofuel program, and in fact we have a very good program of cooperation in the United States that is still in the beginning. Would like to develop it in a more dynamic way of having joint ventures, joint research and joint ventures in Central America and Africa. This will be a huge opportunity for Central America, for Africa in terms of development. Besides biofuel, the last discoveries in oil, we will present opportunities of around $300 billion in terms of investments in new discoveries offshore Brazil. We are a leader in environmental discussions, and this is another opportunity of investments of cooperation. And last, we will have a program of investments of $100 billion for creating this scenario and the services for Olympic Games and World Cup in 2014. So those I would say are the new markets. But of course we have also challenges. The first one is the tax reform. The tax burden on companies, corporations in Brazil is about 35%. It's close to the numbers here in the United States. I think I read that the tax burden here in the United States is about 34-35% as well, but it's very high. A social security reform, we did a social security reform in Brazil. The social programs reach all the poor in Brazil. That's to say 12 million people or 20% of the population. But anyway, there is a deficit in the social programs. We have to see how we can reduce this deficit. A reduction of interest rates. Although Brazil is an investment grade country, we have very high interest rates in international terms. The investments in infrastructure, we have the program that I mentioned to you. Positive credit history. Our credit history is based on negative history, and we continue to reduce government expenditures. And this year, for example, I don't know the exact figures because they are not yet defined, but we will have a reduction in government expenditures. So these are the general remarks that I would like to make. Then I would like to open the floor for a conversation, for your remarks, your comments, questions. But as you saw, we have huge opportunities of cooperation. And I would like to stress again that Brazil, United States are very close countries with a very close society. And I could not see any countries in the world that could have better opportunities that working together for a good future. Thank you. So, questions, comments, discussion?
What are actually some of the technological...
Apparently, oh, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. What are actually some of the technological advancements being made towards the Olympics in 2016? Do you know?
Well, he's asking about technological investments for the international events. We'll need all kind, although Brazil is a relatively advanced market economy. Relatively, I think it's advanced, but in terms of emerging countries, of course, that you cannot compare the sophistication of the market economy here in the United States. That United States is still about 6 times the economy of Brazil, and the most innovative country in the world. Even China, for example, that has a huge population, a huge economy, cannot compete in terms of technology. But I would say that we need technology in every kind of sector, because we are trying we have in some sectors the most advanced technology in biofuels, but in all other segments, we are close, but we are sometime behind. Let's say information technology, we have a very good sector, but trying, of course, the most advanced are here, or sometimes in Japan, or even in Europe. And Europe, of course, will be not at the center of decision, but their legacy in terms of thinking, intellectual thinking, in terms of technology, will stand for the future. And but even for example, in terms of security, in terms of services, we'll need technology. There is an opportunity for investment in very sector in Brazil. So,
That's what I wanted to ask you: is a visa required to travel to Brazil?
Yes, we have some pressures inside Brazil to eliminate the visa requirements, but would not do so because we the visa requirements are based on reciprocity. We try to facilitate. If you go to the consulate from the United States of São Paulo, you take 2 or 3 months to have a visa. Here, if you go to our to the internet, to our page, and you book an appointment, normally 3 or 4 days, sometimes in peak season, 1 maximum 10 days, 2 weeks, you get an appointment. And when you go to the consulate, you receive the visa in the same instant, in half an hour. Then we are trying to facilitate the procedures, but we could not eliminate the visa because it's based on reciprocity. And I don't see, unfortunately, for example, the corporations, they would like to see an agreement between the United States and Brazil and have signed many agreements in Europe with Japan, but taking into consideration the conservative, and sorry for saying that, but it's conservative policy in the United States in terms of immigration, I cannot see in the near future any kind of movement in this direction.
Here's a question. Yes, given the relationship we have through NAFTA with Canada and Mexico, do you think that the United States and Brazil will form a similar kind of a relationship?
Well, the agreement for the Americans Free Trade region is in a standstill, I would say, because of many difficulties on many sides, but not only because of that, because the Doha negotiations are also in a standstill. And we are privileging the multinational negotiations in the context of Doha. In fact is that we decry all negotiations in some way were paralyzed. Even, for example, some bilateral negotiations that the United States had with some countries. I would say that all negotiations all over the world are in a standstill. one of the only negotiations that is very slowly going ahead is Mercosur and European Union, but so slow that then I don't see also in the near future any kind of region agreement, okay? But United States and Brazil bilaterally, we could not have a free trade agreement because we are bound by Mercosur. But we are trying to discuss, including the CEO forum. We have a CEO forum, the largest companies get together with the government to discuss the steps. And we could see many improvements, economic improvements in our relationship. Anyway, the fact that we do not have a free trade agreement does not prevent us to increase our relationship. The potential is there. And in fact, in Brazil, unfortunately, we have the inflow of investments is so huge that we had to increase the tax on international capital coming into the country because it was pressing the real that's very appreciated at this time. And we are dealing not only that the United States took some measures, as you know, as a countermeasure to the yuan, the Chinese and other currencies that are undervalued, and the real is overvalued, then the competitiveness of Brazilian products is suffering from those undervalued currencies. And well, coming back to our question, I don't see in the near future free trade area agreement. But I do see huge potential, and I do see that the lack of our free trade agreement is not preventing these huge opportunities.
I guess this is a follow-up to that question. I think the lack of the free trade agreement maybe is not preventing, but I think it is not enhancing as smooth as it could be. And I guess my question has to do with the dispute over cotton that was settled about a year ago with Brazil and the U.S., and what happens in any type of a trade dispute is one side says something, then the other side raises the stakes. At the end of that dispute, I was concerned because the stakes that were raised was that the U.S. investments, a lot of the companies that were invested in the U.S., the Brazilian government had said they would release their trade secrets. They would make that public knowledge. So another dispute was settled. We didn't have that, did not happen. But what guarantee do companies have if they invest in Brazil that their trade secrets will be protected under Brazilian law?
Well, I didn't hear, sorry, I didn't follow the negotiations closely, but I didn't hear that would disclose, let's say, the trade secrets. What we said at this time that we would take countermeasures in terms of trade. Let's say, putting some kind of tax on some products, and you are right. But I am very confident that the countries and the CEO forums there also to help governments in that way, that we'll never see a trade dispute that will have a large impact on trade, because we'll let's say, get to an agreement. I understand in every time. I don't see that we will reach a point that will go apart and start taking some measures one against the other. And problems, unfortunately, we have and will continue to have. For example, in biofuel, the United States tax every gallon of Brazilian export to the United States on 0.54 cents. That almost prevents from exporting huge amounts of biofuels to the United States. But anyway, I think that the evolution will be positive, although I don't see, you are right, if we had a free trade area. It will be an encouragement to more trade, more investments. At the same time, I don't see this as a blockage, prevention of the potential of investments. And I'm very confident that we'll never reach a point of rupture in terms of one country taking measures against the other country. And I can assure you that although we had a new government in Brazil, and this is a continuation, but we always had a very good relations with the United States, and the new government is taking steps to improve. Yet this relationship, and President Obama will be visiting Brazil on March 20 and March 21st, and I'm quite sure that many cooperation agreements will be signed at this occasion.
Thank you.
Question. As you know, Brazil will be hosting the World Cup, as you mentioned, and then subsequently, 2 years later, the Olympics. The question is that hosting two major events almost back to back will put a financial burden on the Brazilian economy, and money that could be spent on social programs to elevate the lower class, as you said, into the middle class may be difficult. How do you...
No, we see it the other way around. We see it in an opportunity. First of all, $100 billion, it's only 8 to 9% of the overall infrastructure program in Brazil. 8 to 9%. Second, the opportunities that the infrastructure program and the Olympic Games and the World Cup will create in terms, although it's only 8 or 9%, but the opportunities they will create, for example, Rio de Janeiro is a huge city with the metro area, 12 million inhabitants, and it has hundreds of hotels, but it will need 19,000 more rooms for those two events. Can you imagine the impact on job? The fact is that all those infrastructure programs have helped to create jobs in Brazil. The unemployment rate is less than 6% in Brazil today, and it will be, we are foreseeing it will be like 3-4% in the next 5 years because of the infrastructure programs, including the infrastructure programs or the projects for the Olympic Games and the World Cup. Then this will be an opportunity. In fact, the infrastructure will be developed anyway. You understand? For example, as we are planning to double international visitors from 5.2 or 6 million last year to 12 million in 5 years, we will need those kind of hotels and the services, etc. Those are opportunities. So we see it as an opportunity and not as a burden. At least for the size of Brazilian economy. Of course, if you would say, well, let's have the Olympic Games or World Cup in Chile, that is a developed market, I would say, or in another country that's a small country, probably $100 billion would be a burden. But for Brazil, it's in the context of the huge infrastructure program, and it will be really an opportunity.
Ambassador Ganem, I have a question.
Yes, John.
My question is, where are you seeing the most collaborations or the most intercourse between Georgia businesses and Brazilian businesses, and which industry sectors?
Logistics, because I consider Georgia has one of the best infrastructures in the world. First of all, the first airport, very good highways, companies that are very innovative in terms of logistics. So, logistics, I would say, the fourth sector. Second, pulp and paper is a very important and we have already a huge collaboration. We have many important companies as Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, I don't know if this kind of number is reserved, but you tell me.
You have it.
But Coca-Cola will invest $6 billion in next 4 years in Brazil. 6 billion, only Coca-Cola. Then, food processing. Not only you have Coca-Cola invest in Brazil, Brazilian companies investing in here in the region. For biofuels is another huge opportunity, and we have joint research. For example, UGA has a very important program of research with Brazilian universities in terms of biofuel residues from not only ethanol, but residues from wood, etc. And engineering companies. Brazil has one of the most largest engineering companies in the world. For example, basically Florida, the airport, the highways, everything in Florida are built by Brazilian companies. And there are some opportunities here in Georgia, and also some Georgian companies that would like to be in Brazil for the infrastructure program, but some Brazilian engineering companies would like to be present, and in fact there were some plans that were reserved for Brazilian engineering companies of services to be here, especially in Savannah, in the Savannah port. Because of the crisis, the plans were stopped for a while, but I am quite confident in the near future that the Brazilian engineering companies would like to explore the opportunities here in Georgia. So then biofuels, logistics, international paper and pulp, engineering companies on Brazil and here, and food processing. And Lucia, you are the president of Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce. What else?
Port also.
In the ports. Cooperation between the ports. That is logistics. Because logistics, there are many segments. And Lucia, warehouse management, ports. For example, we visited last year, a Brazilian delegation visited the port of Savannah. And there is probably a mission from Savannah this year to Brazil, and one of the main 3 or 4 segments, biofuels, for example, one of the main that design, because they have, there is this fantastic school of design in Savannah, and they will start cooperation in Brazil, but the cooperation between Savannah port and the ports of Brazil, especially Santos, will be very important in this context.
Medical tourism too, there is another area.
Medical tourism in Brazil, and I understand here as well. We have some areas, some segments, very developed of medicine, and of course you have a huge medicine center here, so yes.
Speaking of the medical area, but would you describe then the healthcare system in Brazil is more privately oriented than government controlled?
It's both. The public system in Brazil is universal. It reaches the whole population. Of course, that it lacks in some ways the quality that we, for example, in general terms, of course, there are exceptions. The best heart disease hospital in Brazil is public, but there are very good private also. But with some exception, the private medicine is much better than the public services. And this is the kind of, let's say, challenge that we have with the public service that is already a burden for an emerging country, have a social program that reaches the whole population. But it's mixed, public and private. Hello, Finn.
Given the importance of the environment to the world as a whole, how engaged engaged is your government in protecting the rainforest, and how concerned is it about the deep drilling off the coast that's going to be providing so much development for Brazil?
Okay. Well, until 92, Brazil didn't have a whole role in terms of environment. From the Conference of Rio that started the process in the world for governments taking measures in terms of environment, Brazil was one of the leading countries of the world in terms of environment. And although we are emerging countries, we have one of the most advanced programs in terms of environment. For example, we established a target that I don't remember exactly, Philip, but I think it's about 1/3. Considering the levels of 2005, in 2020, we would reduce the deforestation by 2/3. That's to say, it's 30-something% of the levels of deforestation of 2005. This was the level that we put in terms of deforestation. And we also have a target for emissions. Do you remember the target, Lucy? I think it's 38% reduction in 2020. I'm not sure, huh? I could call you later and tell you exactly the number, because you put my remarks on your newspaper and they, oh, this Consul General is making some, I could call you, tell you exactly number, but I think it's 80% also in terms of the emissions. Concerning drilling, we never had a problem in terms of offshore drilling. And this is one of the areas that Brazil is one of the most developed countries in terms of technology in the world. But we are taking additional measures anyway, and to prevent any kind of accident. But we never had that. But we are very, very careful. And this is why, although we discovered this huge sources some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we have been very careful in developing it. Even because we are self-sufficient in oil and we have biofuels. And in fact, we will have to freeze, understand, some of the funds coming from the development of the oil in the future, because it will be you pump $1 billion in the economy every day when those oil wells are explored. So we are being very, very careful and taking additional measures in terms of offshore drilling.
Ambassador Ganem, we have
Yes.
time for one more question.
Okay.
This elderly student here,
I need all the extra credit I should get.
John Mascaro.
We are all young.
Appreciate that. In Brazil's strategic growth, to be in the top 5 in the
Yes.
economies worldwide, and with the World Cup and the Olympics coming on the horizon, in your tax reform initiative, are you looking to lower the corporate tax to get companies to invest?
Yes. It's not easy, because the problem in the tax reform, and I think it's the same here in the United States, in Brazil, it's, I think, even more a problem in this sense, in this way, is that the states keep disputing. For example, taking the oil, how will you distribute the income from oil? The state where the production is localized, distributed among all states where there is the production, the refineries. How can you distribute the income? And this is the problem in the tax reform in Brazil. It's a huge disputes among these states, and the governors have a very huge influence in Congress, of course, as in the United States. So the disputes among the states and also among the municipalities as well. This is the main question, challenge in getting tax reform passed, but the aim is reducing the corporate rate. That's a huge rate in terms of international standards, especially Asian countries, and even, for example, Chile is a small economy, but anyway, many countries. And this is also a toll in the competitiveness of Brazilian products.
Thank you.
Ambassador Ganem, I want you to know that many of the future business leaders of the United States are sitting in this room, so they may be visiting you someday in Brazil. Clayton State University has the best school of business in the Southeast region. We want you to remember that. And we want to thank the students, for being here, but especially thank you to Ambassador Ganem, the Consul General of Brazil, for being here today. Thank you so much.
Ambassador, on behalf of all the students that are here today and all the faculty and staff, this is a little token of our appreciation, and thank you so very much for taking time out. I know you're very busy. Have another round for him.
Thank you. The design is so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting.